This is our Bivariate presentation called Factors that Affect the Degree of Political Activity in Canada.
Our research question is, what kind of factors affect the degree of political activity of a Canadian? Our three independent variables which might increase the degree of political activity of an individual are satisfaction with democracy, gender, and political view. We used the dataset Campaign Period Questionnaire 2008. We created a dependent variable index of political activity and then performed a cross-tabulation of our index and our three independent variables. We used chi-square, Kendall's tau c, and Kramer's v to determine the statistical significance.
Some of our academic literature background states that people are generally satisfied with the ideology of democracy rather than the specific parts of the Canadian democratic system. Also, there were findings of gender gap in political interest, which is derived from the association between political engagement and political participation. Previous research has shown a strong relationship between party identification and participation in conventional political activities such as voting and campaign behavior. Also, there were different levels of participatory incentives perceived by party identifiers and non-party identifiers.
Our first hypothesis is satisfaction with democracy positively affects the degree of political activity. The rationale behind this is that an individual is more willing to participate in political activity if he or she is satisfied with democracy. Our second hypothesis is gender affects the degree of political activity. The rationale behind this is that due to history and societal structures, such as gender roles and employment, men are more likely to participate in political activity. Our third hypothesis is political view affects the degree of political activity. The rationale behind this is that people with interest in core parties, conservative, liberals, or NDP, are more likely to participate in political activity.
This is our reliability analysis of political activity. We initially used four dependent variables to conduct an index, which were interest in federal election, A3, overall interest in politics, A4, interest in U.S. elections, A5, and how likely you are to vote, B3A. However, as demonstrated in the first chart, the last variable, B3A, had a higher alpha value of 0.8006 compared to the standardized alpha of 0.7648. Therefore, we decided to eliminate the last variable and conduct a new analysis as shown at the bottom.
This is the index we created of our three dependent variables. We decided to recode this index into three categories of high, medium, and low, with 10 values in each category.
This is a cross-tabulation using our first independent variable displaying political activity by satisfaction with democracy. Evidently, as we hypothesized, high satisfaction with democracy is associated with high levels of political activity, while low satisfaction is associated with low political activity. Also, our Pearson chi-square value of 0.0000 indicates that this relationship has a high statistical significance.
This is a cross-tabulation using our second independent variable displaying political activity by gender. As one can see, across the columns there is a difference between men and women in that men are more politically active than women, but this difference is not very significant. Both the chi-square and Kramer's v values support this conclusion in that neither show statistical significance.
And finally, this is a cross-tabulation of our third independent variable displaying political activity by party interest. Although high levels of political activity is associated with the core parties such as Liberals, Conservatives, and NDPs compared to the other parties, there is not much of a difference between those core parties, ranging from 51%, 43%, and 42%. The values of our chi-square and Kramer's v indicate that this has a low statistical significance.
Next is a summary of our findings. Using the independent variable satisfaction with democracy, we found that there is a high statistical significance between satisfaction with democracy and political activity. This is relevant to the literature in that people are generally satisfied with democracy. However, our findings display how this affects political activity. Our findings also highly support our hypothesis that satisfaction with democracy positively affects the degree of political activity. Next is gender. We found a low statistical significance between gender and political activity. This is somewhat relevant to the literature because we did find a difference between genders, but this difference was not very big. This analysis supports our hypothesis in that there is a relationship between gender and political activity. However, this relationship is very weak. Lastly, we analyzed party interest and found that there is a low statistical significance between party interest and political activity. These findings had a weak relevance to the literature, which stated that this relationship would be strong. Our findings support our hypothesis because people with an interest in core parties, such as conservatives, liberals, and NDP, are more likely to be politically active than others.
This is our conclusion, stating that satisfaction with democracy may be important than previously considered in influencing levels of political activity. Further research should be done on how to increase satisfaction with democracy in order to increase political activity as well. Second, gender may not be as important in determining levels of political activity. Further research should be done on societal structures surrounding gender and its influence on access to political activity. Although party interest does not have a big importance in determining the levels of political activity, research should still be done on the influence of individual parties towards their respective voters in order to increase the levels of political activity. This is a syntax of our assignment, and thank you for listening to our presentation.